I'm just delighted to be sharing this information with you. I found it very helpful, which is using three voices in your integral writing. Now, you might have already, heard about this, or you'll probably find you already do it. But I really thought it was a good thing for us to kind of look at the whole thing and see what this is. Now, it comes from a book called Integral Education, and which is a series of essays written by various integral educators reporting on the efficacy of their teaching methodologies. And one of the essays reported on having the benefits of requiring the students to write their reflections using three voices as a way to address the four quadrant realms of I, we, and it. Now, the three voices they refer to are the voice of the scientist, which is all about the it, the objective description, the theory behind the topic, the research behind it, more of an outside view. And this is where we might introduce a topic and define it, outline it, highlight its main features. And then there's what they call the voice of the artist. And this doesn't mean we get out our paints and our markers. It means we give our personal, subjective perspective to the what, to whatever it is we're talking about. And it's an interior aspect of our creative exploration. And here's where we use our personal stories, our reflections, our own personal experiences, our observations, and we're really explaining how this has shown up in our lives. And then finally, the third voice is the voice of what they say is the philosopher, which looks at the broader questions. What does this mean for us as a community, as a culture, as a society? What are the possible implications for us in regards to collective transformation? This is so exciting to me. So when we look at the four quadrants, we see that the voice of the scientist is the objective it and its. It's the upper and lower right. The artist is the I of personal interiority, the upper left. And the philosopher is the lower left, we. How does this affect us? So if I'm writing in the voice of the scientist, here's where I would include relevant research, and especially, preferably actually, in a narrative format. So it's not just dry theory. I'm telling a story about this. And then when I move to the voice of the artist, this is where I would definitely have a personal story of a time when I practiced whatever this topic is and had a transformative insight or an experience or something emerged from it that I want to share. And I would really describe that in detail and getting in, the really interesting parts of that, the emotions, the depths of it. And then the voice of the philosopher would look at the power of this practice and how might it affect our world. What's the relevance to us as a culture? So the interesting thing about this was, as I considered these three voices, I realized, well, this is the typical way that I write already, whether it's my Sunday talks that I do, or my classes, giving the sort of lecture part of the classes, or my writing, blogs, those three voices are usually in there and sometimes in varying degrees. Sometimes the scientist has more to say, sometimes the artist, sometimes the philosopher, but typically I can find all three in there. And so I want to give you an example from a class that I taught on the power of compassion. And specifically in this class, it was in using self-compassion in dealing with triggering moments from our past. So my husband and I teach a program where people take those triggering moments and utilize them in order to do integration of the shadow beliefs that are behind those triggers. And part of what we do is go back to an earlier time when this emerged, and we work with the memory. But it's very easy to get re-triggered when we're going back to those early memories if they still hold juice for us. So I was teaching a class on how important self-compassion is because of the power of it to make it safe for us to be looking at all of that. So I'm not going to go into all the details of this class, but I'm going to just give you some of the highlights to sort of illustrate the three voices. So I began by talking about a team of researchers headed by a neurobiologist, and they were doing research on the physiological neural changes that happen when participants feel empathy. And so they were asking the question, what happens in the brain when people empathize with another's feelings? And the researchers had previously shown all the participants a very distressing emotional video about the plight of Romanian orphans that was happening at the time. And here's our monk. There was a monk that was part of that study. They got him all wired up to test him, as you can see. And so they told him to begin empathizing with these children. They'd shown him the video. They said, we want you to think about those children and have empathy with them. And so he began to do so. And here's what they discovered from the research, not just with the monk, but with all the people in the research, was that when someone was feeling empathy, feeling another's emotional pain, what happens to the brain is that it lights up the pain system in the brain.
Mm.
And it can actually, if we stay in that long enough, lead to something called empathic distress. And here's where we're very triggered because we are so connected to the pain that we're having empathy for with this person. And our threat system can actually engage. We can get into fight or flight in full gear here. And so the researchers could see that this monk was entering empathic distress. And so they asked him if he needed to take a break. But he said, yes, but before I do, I want to switch to compassion. So when he did that, now they could see the difference that was happening within his brain. Instead of the pain centers in the brain, the care centers lit up. That's what happens when we have empathy with another's pain, the pain center lights up. When we feel compassion, the care center lights up. And here's why. When we're feeling compassion toward another, there's a differentiation between me as the sender and the person as the receiver. And so the really good news for all of us here is this: compassion can transform empathic distress. Now, many of us are kind of stuck in empathic distress right now, but I will say more about that in a moment. But when I read about this research, it occurred to me that compassion could also be the antidote to times when we are stuck in empathic distress, not towards another person, but towards a memory, towards our younger self in the past, if you will. And it's because of us doing this kind of work with people where they're going back to a memory, and I can see someone is going into empathic distress because they're re-experiencing that moment. They're re-experiencing the pain of the moment. And if my younger self has experienced some painful moment that still is alive for me, still has juice, even though I may have pushed it away, buried it. But if I touch that memory and it still lights up, if that memory can trigger fight or flight reactivity, then I am in empathic distress with my younger self. That's what's happening to me, in a sense. And I'm talking here about cringe-worthy moments, right? So just imagine if I'm dealing with one of those cringe-worthy moments from my younger days. Now, I'm not talking here about capital T trauma. That's another sort of topic here. That can take more support to work through. But I am talking about a time when maybe I was embarrassed by saying the wrong thing in school. Everybody laughed, those moments that when I even think about it, I just kind of, I still go back there. And if truth be told, my entire adolescent years are, bountiful with those kinds of memories. So I don't have to look too far. And so I decided to test out my theory. And I thought back to a moment of pain that was still living in me, an embarrassing moment that could still make me cringe. And I started to focus on it and feel the pain again. feel the shame that's happened in that moment. And as I continued to do this, it didn't take long for me to get into empathic distress with my 13-year-old former self. Even though this incident had happened like over half a century ago, this just blew my mind. So I stayed with the discomfort, and then I tried to activate some compassion toward my younger self. And I got to tell you, it was difficult. It took some
Mm.
work to get there. And here's why. Because all these decades, I have been mercilessly um, judging my younger self, shaking my head, condemning her behavior. What a stupid thing to do. What a stupid thing to say. But so it took me some work, but I was finally able to go back to that memory. And this time, I surrounded my 13-year-old self not with judgment and condemnation, but with support, with kindness, with caring, with compassion, and which is what my younger self needed in that moment and did not get it. And that's what made it so painful. That's what kept it exiled, out of my psyche. But I lavished on her all that I didn't get in the moment. Now I gave it to her as her future self, sending forth all this love and compassion. And as I did that, I felt this amazing integration begin to happen. And the moment that had been exiled from my psyche, I could feel it being brought into the fold, integrated, calmed. It could no longer trigger me. It was a powerful moment where I saw the power of self-compassion. So the antidote to, colluding with that early wounding or being haunted by painful memories is to accompany ourselves, reaccompany ourselves through those memories with warmth, self-compassion, and kindness. Sarah Payton, who is a psychologist who does this kind of work, says the first time we went through these embarrassing moments, we were unaccompanied minors. Now we can go
Mm.
back with the kindness of our hearts and accompany our younger self through it, lavishing the kindness on that inner child and giving he or she what she needed and didn't get. This is a powerful practice. So, what does this mean for us as a human family? Well, here's my theory. It's this. If we all learned to practice self compassion, it would bring peace to our world.
Mhm.
Wars would end as we
Mhm.
know it. Carl Jung tells us that pain from our past, if it's not integrated, it's going to show up in some way in our life. It's going to be reflected back to us in some way. As Richard Rohr puts it, pain not transformed is pain transmitted. And what happens when a whole bunch of people are walking around with pain not transformed, pain transmitted? Well, Resma Manicum is a trauma therapist, and he tells us you gather together a group of what he calls unsettled bodies, people who are triggered, holding on to pain, unresolved shadow from the past, suffering. Gather those people together in their distressed states. You are going to end up with a whole heap of trouble. But, he says, gather together settled bodies, which self compassion absolutely helps to bring forth. Now, you have a potential movement for peace. So, do you see how self compassion can be the secret sauce for evolutionary transformation into a kinder, more compassionate world? This just gets me so excited. And so, think of the three voices here telling the story of our monk, the different parts of the brain, and that light up with compassion and empathy. That's the voice of the scientist. Then telling my personal story about empathic distress over a memory, but being able to recover it and integrate it. That's the voice of the artist, because you see, now that the nervous system is settled, something new can be created. This makes it the artist. It's very creative. And I will say that when I taught this course, I went into a lot of detail about this memory. I didn't just kind of
Mhm.
say, as I did today, I had a memory. I described the moment. I took us there in a much deeper way, but I didn't want to take everybody through that today. But that's the voice of the artist doing that. And then looking at how can this help us to deal with the current craziness of the world we live in? So imagine if people could learn to have compassion for themselves when they become triggered, to settle their nervous systems, to integrate painful memories, How different might our world be? This is the philosopher. So that's an example of using the three voices. And if we can keep in mind writing with the I, we, and it voices, it's going to help our readers to explore what we're writing about in a much, much deeper way. So I'm going to stop sharing now, put my camera back on, and welcome, Jendon. Good to see you. Are you calling in from Spain?
Oh, I'm in Canada at the moment.
Oh,
Wow.
great to see you. Great to
Yeah,
see
good to
you.
see you.
My way of Portugal,
Yeah.
Scotland, and uh, now I'm in Canada.
Are you going to
Wow.
stay in North America?
Pardon?
Are you going to stay in North America? Is that your plan
Well,
now?
I might bounce between Portugal and Canada.
Mm.
That's the plan at the moment. But
Wonderful.
so,
Well,
well, and I was when I was over in Europe, it was like midnight when this
Yeah.
was
sure.
happening. So that's why I wasn't coming.
Right.
Good to
So,
see you.
so I would like to open this up for comments or questions about what we've heard. But also, here's the question to discuss. Is there a voice that you generally prefer to write in? And if so, how could you maybe work toward incorporating the others that have been more silent in your writing? So,
Wow. Okay.
comments, questions, thoughts?
Well, certainly in my economics book, I probably was more on the it's thing. Uh, Currently, I'm writing an autobiographical novel, so I'm not quite sure where I'm coming from with that. Definitely some philosophical stuff because I'm writing about the last 20 years and emphasizing my spiritual experiences. So, but then
Yeah.
well, actually, I guess I am using the uh, its voice, some because I'm writing about my economics book as if I'm talking about somebody I met at an integral conference. So I'm not because I need the book to be anonymous because I'm talking, about my Alcoholics Anonymous experience as well, and so I can't go public with
Right.
that's me.
Sure.
So yeah, so it's kind of interesting. Plus, I did take this course with Fleet Mall called Self Parenting, and the last part you talked about is the big thing for him is to become embodied. They're really heavy on embodied meditation at the Heart Mind Institute. Um, but this self-parenting course is sort of what you're talking about. I'd say, after you get embodied, then you do sort of more expand to the everything as well as I don't know as he called it compassion, but I think that you did that at points. But he
Mhm.
was just saying if you're more embodied, since we're usually in our heads,
Yeah.
that
Exactly.
just being embodied, you don't take on that empathic, uh,
Mhm.
you don't take on with the empathy, you don't take on the where you go get depressed yourself. Yeah.
Right. And the reparenting, really, that's a lot of what you're doing when you go back and accompany your younger self going through a distressing moment. And this time you can put it to rest because that child who needed the protection then finally gets it. And until then it's kind of frozen in our nervous system. It's
Yeah.
like it's not done yet, and
Yeah.
often we'll exile the memory if it's a really, if you know, if we feel shame or whatever, and it just never gets dealt with, but it's still alive under there, you know.
Mm.
And so when we can go back and just tenderly walk with that child, it just, oh my goodness, you can feel the relief. And I recommend Sarah Payton's work. If you're not familiar with her, she helps people learn how to go back and do that. Take the unaccompanied minor, and love. You're really loving yourself back to your wholeness. That's the way I think
Yeah.
of it. So
Mhm.
yeah, great work, Jendon. Thanks. And I will say, last time I said, when I was talking on this with this group, I talked about Grace and Grit,
Hmm.
Ken's book.
Yeah.
That's an example of a sort of an autobiographical book where he actually also has the voice of the scientist in there. He manages to get, as if somebody asks him a question about something, and then he goes into, all about, the different levels and lines and stuff. And I'm like, Ken, I can't believe you got this in the book, but he does it really well. So
Yeah.
that's an example of how you can do that even when it's just personal stories. So great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, goodness. First of all, just a comment on one piece you touched on, Jane, which is that I think many or maybe all of you are aware that there is a specific Buddhist meditation called metta, which is compassion, and it's actually it's Tonglen, it's Tibetan, where you sit in meditation, and it's a very powerful technique, and you breathe in the suffering. It may be of a specific person, something very personal or your own, or it could be anything, the suffering of the world. You consciously take it in as suffering, and then you breathe it out as compassion. So, I mean, some of the Buddhist groups have worked on a psychotechnology, a very advanced psychotech for actively transmuting pain into compassion. So I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, wow. It's so good to see this stuff going mainstream. But I'm really excited by this, Jane, because my personal news is I just had a piece of my creative writing published for the first time today, and let me see, put it in the chat. It's in an online publication by Cosmos Cooperative. It's their in-house magazine, and it's a memoir. It's under 3,000 words, I think. It's pretty short, and they found wonderful illustrations for it.
Nice.
But this is a memoir. This is one of my Kensho type spiritual openings that I've been working for like decades to try to get into a verbal form that communicates something about it. But as you are going through the three steps, the three voices, and then the three stages, and I realized I think that essay follows those three. The first part is a personal experience. The first of my two severe depressive episodes, and I touch on that. And then how I came out. It's basically my personal experience. And I encountered a black widow spider on my kitchen counter, and how that popped me into a Kensho type experience. That's the first person subjective. Um, for I'd
Right.
say the first 2/5 to 1/2, and then I expound, and I'm trying to explain. Um, so actually, maybe I've reversed it, but the scientist voice. This is as then actually, so it's a little out of the order. I go into a narrative that tries to present this this trans-rational experience in rational terms. So I guess I started with the I, my experience. Then I went into the science voice, but it is a narration. And then I finished with the we, what this means for the larger community, the problem of suffering. What this means. Do we have a possible solution to the age-old problem of suffering? So I went through those three voices. Now, I personally tend to, in like my novel in progress, I think the first person voice, even when I'm writing in a third person narrator, it tends to be from the experience. But then the novel's set 11,000 years ago, in the dawn of agriculture. So be thinking much more intentionally about those three voices as I continue. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And they do come in different orders. It's not always one,
Yeah,
two, three. I've
yeah,
often started with a personal story that illustrates a spiritual concept and then gone into the science behind it. And then
Yeah.
yeah, great. Ron, go ahead.
Hey, thank you. There's two aspects. The story that you told there, and how it weaved together. I really the impact of the content of that, transforming empathic distress into compassion. I thought was really really valuable. And the other part was the fact of the voices, the three voices that you produced to construct that very powerful story. So really grateful of you sharing that, and it's certainly something I'm going to take away with. The three voices remind me of the work of formal axiology. Have you come across formal axiology? Robert S. Hartman, who is the father of formal axiology, is very closely related to the three voices. And he talks about the intrinsic, the extrinsic, and the systemic voices that we have going on. And that sort of, for me, the intrinsic is the artist, the extrinsic is the philosopher, and the systemic being the scientific. And interesting enough, he has an assessment that you can take that identifies where you might have emotional biases towards each of these three voices. And your question is there a voice that I generally write in? Could well be because you have an emotional bias towards that voice within inside yourself. Yeah. And to bring these three voices together and give them some sort of balance, I think is a very, very powerful approach to make sure that you're not overemphasizing one or above the others, because they're all important. Yeah.
Yes,
Done.
exactly. Thanks, Ron. Yeah, I love that. Intrinsic, extrinsic, and systematic. I was trying to think of other words than just artist and philosopher, but I thought, well, this is what they use in their class and it
Yeah.
works for them. But that's great to get that. And yeah, you're right. We could have a total, sometimes I find it's like, oh, why am I putting so much theory into this? It's too dry. A little bit is good. A little bit is interesting, but too much. It's just too much. So you need something in there that helps to ease it a little bit and illustrate it and bring it into the personal, and then look at why does this matter to us. And in this day and age, I think it matters so much. Karen, I love you bringing up Tom Glenn, because imagine if we all took on this practice of breathing in the world's suffering. And the way I've had that described to me, you breathe it in and you let it scrub your heart clean of anything, keeping it from being total compassion. And then you breathe it out, right? And so,
Wow.
I used to teach this to our chaplains in our church, and they would use that while they were praying with people. And one of them came and said, "You can do this with your kids." I'm like, "Yes, you can." Teenagers. This works with teenagers. So, and so it's a beautiful practice that you don't have to flash a neon light that this is what you're doing. But the more we can contribute to, more love and kindness in our world, well, don't we need to be doing that?
Oh man, it's synchronous. I was just thinking this morning, going out for a walk. It's a beautiful day here, and the things are blooming and so on. And a very pleasant exchange with a neighbor, a very pleasant exchange with the person who notarized some government forms I had to have notarized out. And just every little contact with another human being was just so pleasant, even though there was, and I just kind of had this like, if we could all just be nice to each other, if that's all it would take for this to be a paradise on earth. I mean, there would still be struggle and suffering, but so much of the deep suffering would just, if we could all just, but this is what you're talking about, Jane, is exactly the kinds of deep-seated patterning from early on that's preventing us. So these techniques, and then as we embody them in the world in our writing, they will go on to influence the world in a ripple effect.
Exactly. And I just think of Richard Rohr, pain not transformed is pain transmitted. And the more we clean up our own inner stuff, the more clear we become of that, not projecting our pain out onto the world
Right.
and adding to the angst that's going on out there, but just actually bringing it in and transmuting it into something better. Yeah.
Yes.
Ron, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering if anyone had recognized, and I recognize this here in Australia, that there has, in my experience, interaction, just like you said, Karen, the interactions that we have in our daily work of what we do. I just noticed that there is an increase in compassion towards each other. It's almost like an antidote to what we see out there at the other end of
Yes.
the polarity. And it's
Yes.
even a supermarket, a degree of increased politeness, a degree of
Yes.
increase in just letting someone go in first before you because you've got less groceries than that sort of thing. I see increasing. I'm wondering if there's any sort of increase in compassion you see in your day-to-day activities as an antidote to what is
Hmm.
obviously at the other end of the polarity.
Hmm. I'm not seeing that so much. What I am sensing, I'm intuitive and empathic. I'm not psychic, but I'm intuitive and empathic. And what I'm feeling is opening I could do a whole presentation on what we're going through now. I mean, basically, the next world order is coming online, and it will be kinder, gentler because of psychotechnologies like this. The Tonglen is coming into knowledge in the West. We are able to intentionally engage in practices that transform our behavior. So my life is pretty ordered. I'm not seeing a change in that, but what I'm sensing in the world is that because of the convulsions we're going through, that we are aware of what we do want instead, and that this translates in times of grave catastrophe, people pull together. When horrible storms happen and our community on the Pacific Northwest is hit and trees go down and we are cut off from electricity and the outside world for 4 days, everybody bands together and takes care of each other. And we come together in heartfelt ways that we just in our daily lives we wouldn't. What you're talking about, Ron, that's how I translate it, that I'm getting a sense that we're tending to do that on a larger scale. Now, what I see, intuitive compassion and as a cultural historian who likes big pictures, is we are seeing the end of one world order as the next new world order is coming online. These always are eras of grave turbulence, right? Phase changes. But I see opportunities opening. I see as some of the old structures are crumbling, I'm seeing the potential for what we call second tier, the next level up, and that is going to involve a more compassionate society. So I see clearings where we can start moving forward with direction and purpose and intentionally into a world where people are able to be more like this, where we understand the forces that cause people to behave very badly to each other, and we see them with compassion but also insight. And we know how we don't want to raise our children now, and we know how to treat people who are caught in these negative patterns that hurt them more than anybody else. We can have compassion with insight and clarity with these techniques. So I see, I don't know how much worse things are going to get before they start getting better, but eventually the next world order will come online and this will become more common. What we're talking about here will become more commonplace. And so that's kind of the big picture I'm seeing. And that's, I think, what drives every one of us here is to help with our artistic gifts, is to kind of help move us forward into that. That's my mission statement, I guess.
Thanks, Karen.
Mhm.
Anyone else?
Sure. Jane, as usual,
Yeah.
I am blown away by, it's going to be another presentation about writing and it's going to be really kind of boring, but I'll go. Yeah, it's never
Never boring.
boring. And it's always like tonight, it was just so inspirational. I just wanted to kind of go through some of my columns that I've written already. You know, you just piqued that curiosity, like how, because I could think of just sort of little wisps of examples of where I've used those voices and stuff. But you know, I mean, it's just such an interesting practice to just bring more life and more variety into your writing by having those little tools in your toolbox.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you
Amen.
know.
You know, when I was going through this and preparing for it, I remembered about a minister I met. I don't want to bring this into the church world, but as a minister, I've met another minister who told me that, and this was a Methodist minister. I'm a New Thought minister, and so we're a little different, you know, in our perspectives. But this guy is very, very open in his views. He had created a vision for his church, which was a mission to know God, to serve God, to know God. I should know this, to know God, God, to serve God. I guess that was it. No, to know God, to love God, to serve God. That was.
Yeah.
And so then he told us, he was training, he was doing a training and I was there. And he said, everything in my church goes through this. Every sermon, every lesson, every ministry that's within the church. They had 12,000 people coming through on the weekend, you know, just huge numbers. Has to have in this. To know God has something that makes people think a little bit. Some little artistic or something interesting that something about it. To love God, there's a warming story in there, something that heart. And to serve God, there has to be action steps. And
Mm.
what he did every week. And so I heard his sermons and it was like, this is, and so as I was doing this, I thought, he's doing the three voices, he's doing, you know, what it is. He's doing his personal thing, and here's why this is to make a difference in the world. And he's been doing this for, you know, 30 years and without knowing that's what it was. And so I learned way back then, you know, and it feeds different people who are listening, right? There's the people who want those statistics. They want to know that little piece of science that interests them. And then there's one that wants to hear that loving story. And then there's somebody, I won't tell me, you know, what's a step I can take. And so it scratches the itch for everybody.
Mhm.
And so I see it's helped me to drill down in this, saying, you know, we all learn differently. We all hear it differently. You know, we see it, hear it through our own perspectives. And this has a little bit of something for everybody and helps us to drill it down even deeper, especially integral concepts. So we're going to be talking about, and you know, what you were saying, Karen, is that we get to create what we want. And
Mhm.
it goes right back to Buckminster. You know, one of my favorite quotes is, you know, fight existing, you know, culture, creates something that
Sorry,
makes it
Jane,
obsolete.
Jane, your voice broke up a bit. Could you repeat the last couple of sentences? Oh,
Buckminster Fuller, you know,
oh,
he
right.
would say, uh, you know, don't fight the existing reality, create something that makes it obsolete. And that's, I think, what our
Yes.
work is to allow what's going on, to hospice what's dying,
Yes.
and midwife what the emergent insight is that wants to come forth, and then to nurture it, you know, take transplant from our garden
Mhm.
into um, a greater expression of what wants to come forth. So don't get me started on
Wow.
this. This is when my minister
Okay.
comes out, but
Oh,
I have
oh.
to say I'm really on fire with this, as you can tell. Anyway,
Awesome. You know, midwifing the next incoming era is one of my central grounding metaphors. A new era is being born. We are helping midwife it. That's what we're doing singly and collectively, and the way we're coming together. So we're near the top of the hour. Is it okay if I just kind of polish off here? The
Yes.
plan was for me to give the presentation today about the future of this writer's pod, but because the conferences that are shaping our potential are still happening, I deferred to next month, and Jane very graciously took in on short notice, and we have been the beneficiaries of this. But
Mhm.
Goddess willing, I will take on being the main presenter at our next meeting in a month, and we will have 3 conferences under our belts and lots of connections, some really exciting possibilities to nurture this pod. And those of you who've been turning up all along or recently, you will be among the guiding voices to say what we're going to take out of all of these potential nutrients and connections, supportive connections that are opening up, where we want to take this pods, because we're going to have a lot of potential for growth. So I'll
Yay.
be hopefully have a lot more specifics to offer next week, and we can start the discussion of where we want to take this group.
Very exciting. Very
It is
exciting.
exciting. Things are opening up.